Where to begin? Well, the term Asperger's and autism only are about a century old. Neurodiversity has a much longer and often darker history than that. Penny Spinkins and Barry White, despite a lack of skeletal evidence, suggest that some of the first painters on caves were actually people who were neurodiverse or autistic. In ancient Egypt and Rome, a lot of nobility and even emperors kept people who had dwarfism or who were neurodiverse as entertainers or courtiers. At the same time, in ancient Rome though, some of the first laws attempting to control the lives of neurodiverse people, the law of the 12 tables, emerged. It suggested any person who was neurodiverse with property had to be provided a guardian who would be able to make sure they did not ruin, lose, or just give away property that they had. Custodianship over the property of neurodiverse people by the Renaissance was almost total. It had been inspired by the law of the 12 tables and put fully in the power of the crown, the royal prerogative. In legal cases created to deal with the custody of such fools, we find the only definitions of folly or neurodiversity in this period, that of a legal sense in which someone was a natural fool or idiot or neurodiverse. Things like issues counting money, dealing with property, later being able to read or remembering family details or personal details about oneself were some of the things that were looked for to define what a natural fool was. Scripture portrayed natural fools as made by God that way for his own purpose, able, like children as innocents, to be closer to God just because they were fools, and people who were worthy of charity. All positive things in the Renaissance. Such positive ideas in a recurring fashion for keeping fools since antiquity came together to create the important position of the court jester or fool of a king or queen. In return for being looked after and provided with anything they might need, as well as providing entertainment and comedy, obviously, fools were also there to tell rulers the truth. Often people at court were flatterers and would not tell a ruler what they had to hear. People who were neurodiverse and believed to be more blunt than other people would speak honestly to a ruler and tell them what they had to hear. Due to their lack of status, they also made good companions to rulers. And sometimes fools were even believed to be able to tell the future and prophesise. Such traits were believed to make them have a desired differentness, which the royal courts in England and Scotland and across Europe and the world appreciated and saw as essential. Tudor fools like Will Sommers, Jane the Fool and Sexton had a freedom of speech at the Tudor court that other people could only dream of. Even when Sexton overstepped the line severely by offending both Queen Anne and Princess Elizabeth to Henry VIII's face, he managed to survive unscathed with a level of punishment much lower than other people who offended or angered the Tudors. Unfortunately, such opportunities disappeared as legal categorisation was joined by increasing medical diagnosis and categorisation of idiocy or folly. This was due to Presbyterianism seeing a rise in things such as literacy, which made increasingly more people definable as fools, but also the popularisation of binaries, of those who were saved, those who were not, of the normal and the abnormal. Such ideas would have a big impact on disabled people going forward. Neurodiversity became a permanent congenital defect. It was believed to be an undesired differentness for the first time. Those like Felix Platter and Thomas Willis tried to find a source for folly in the human body via dissection. Unfortunately, such concepts led neurodiverse people to be viewed as only good for being fixed, controlled, locked up and institutionalised. They were locked up in places like Bridewell, like Bedlam, but most of all workhouses. One 1861 survey found that the majority of long-term inmates in poorhouses tended to be people who were epileptic or neurodiverse. In the 1920s, the term autism came to mean the developmental disorder you will have heard of. The idea was believed to originate in the US work of Leo Kanner and the Austrian work of Hans Asperger in the 1940s. The fact is though, both have received all of this credit unfairly, most of all Hans Asperger. I was diagnosed with Asperger's in 2005. Nowadays, if you get a diagnosis, it will typically be of ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. The reason for this is we now know that autism is more of a spectrum than separate conditions. But on the other hand, the reason why this has happened is because Hans Asperger has finally been exposed. Hans Asperger didn't create Asperger's syndrome to save his little scientists, as his translator and clinician Jutta Furth has claimed. Instead, Hans Asperger stole the ideas of Jewish experts who were sometimes superiors to him. In addition, he wholeheartedly backed and supported Nazi views. In the 1920s, two Jewish scientists, G.E. Secmezsoy-Urquhart and Austrian George Frankl, wrote about autism. This was 10 to 20 years before Leo Kanner or Hans Asperger's did. Secmezsoy-Urquhart's work included the first looks at autism in girls. This was something that Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger didn't even believe could happen. Meanwhile, Frankl worked at the Lazar Clinic in Vienna with Hans Asperger. He deduced autism was a spectrum with variable degrees of severity, a state of mind, and should be understood and accepted. Asperger's was able to steal the credit for concepts that Frankl came up with. Part of this was because Frankl was Jewish and ended up having to escape to the US, where he worked with Kanner for years. Once Frankl felt he had to leave, Hans was able to rise through the Nazi hierarchy at the clinic that he'd left. Asperger's willingly joined a number of Nazi affiliated groups, those like the Catholic Bund Newland, the anti-Jewish Verein Deutschland arts groups, but also the National Socialist German Finishing League. His NSDAP file described him as having a commitment to National Socialist ideas, and shockingly, he didn't stop any of the deaths that he claimed he did later. Instead, he sent many to Spiegelgrund Euthanasia Clinic in Vienna. They were deemed by him unable to contribute as organisms in the social community. One of his victims among 800 children euthanised there is this little girl, Herta Schreiber. Only 3 years old, she had developmental issues following encephalitis, making her an unbearable burden to her mother in Hans Asperger's view. So she was transferred to Spiegelgrund, where this disturbing photo is all that visually survives of her life. This little girl in tears with her head shaved to dehumanise her was reported to the Scientific Registration of Serious Hereditary and Congenital Illnesses. She was euthanised by drug-induced pneumonia. Asperger's post-World War II, as this information was hidden, was celebrated only thanks to often Jewish scholars like Schiffer and Czech do we now know the crimes that he was responsible for and how he contributed to some of the greatest crimes ever done against humanity. The rise of the disability rights movement, online communities and autistic-led research like the work of sociologist Judy Singer, who as an autistic person created the idea of neurodiversity to describe the positive human biodiversity that autism brings to humanity, has helped change how we view autism and neurodiversity once more. Asperger's is no longer in the DCM-5. The unique presentation in girls is always considered nowadays, and neurodiversity as an idea is becoming widely adopted. Finally, justice is being done for Franco and Sakavera. Terms like neurodiversity or ASD, which accept autism as normal or even beneficial, look backwards to how it was ironically viewed positively in the Renaissance and medieval periods. But also, such terms and ideas look forward to an inclusive world in which all autistic people will be accepted and appreciated. It's a world I hope to see one day.